Hey guys, this is going to be the last episode of the year, uh, episode 49, uh, but it's the 50th episode that I recorded this year. And so this episode will just be a quick rundown of the topics and the guests that we had on this year. So just diving in with episode 0, the preview episode, I kind of shared what the podcast is about and the purpose of the podcast, which is to inspire you and to encourage you to be more brave in life. And the the first episode was a couple lessons from my first MMA fight, and the it was also about mental health and suicide. I talk about losing one of my coaches, Robert Follis, to suicide, and yeah, it's been a few years now, just this last month, since he's been gone. The next episode was with Scott Waters, and Scott was the first person who agreed to be on the podcast. And that episode is one of the most watched or downloaded videos because he shares very practical framework, values, the acronym values, and he uses that as a framework in the work that he does with couples. And I have often assigned that podcast episode as homework for couples because it's really helpful. Then the next episode was with Tammy Keppel, one of my coworkers at Kaiser, and Scott was the first person to agree to be on the podcast, but Tammy was actually the first person I interviewed, and we talked about marriage and getting remarried, and also what I learned from her, or what was helpful with that episode was how she talked about her uh, her daughters and her husband, how they connected and their relationship, and how she kind of supported that adjustment and transition in their life. I thought that part of the interview was really helpful. Episode 3 and 4 were with Benjamin and Heidi Sadler, my friends, who have the band Chasing Ebenezer. And in those two episodes, we talked about marriage and mental health. We talked about music, and we talked about ministry. They are worship leaders and pastors. Benjamin and Heidi, we attend their house church on Sunday evenings. And I just appreciate them so much. They're such real and open and transparent people. And what was helpful about those episodes, there was so much, but they talked about struggling with emotional health and grief while trying to help others who are struggling with emotional health and spiritual health. And so Heidi shares about losing her mom during the pandemic, losing her mom to COVID, and the grief that she experienced. And also she talks about her decision to start therapy, and even the decision to use medication to help with emotional health. So very practical, very helpful conversation, and a lot of fun. I just love talking with Benjamin and Heidi, and they've helped so many people. They're just really wise in the way they interact with people, and that really comes through in that interview. The next episode was with Becky Castle Miller, and Becky is a pastor and an author, and we talked about ministry and mental health in this episode, and the importance of emotions, and like a biblical perspective on emotions and what the Bible teaches about emotions, and it's pretty neat. Becky, she went to school because she knew she needed more education to write the book that she wanted to write. Um, and she's already written, I think, a couple. Um, and I'm looking forward to her book on uh, emotions and Jesus, and also her podcast. I think that she's going to start soon. So check out that episode. She also talks about healing and recovering from spiritual abuse. And just really appreciate Becky. And she's fun to follow on Instagram. So check her out. Check out that episode. Uh, the next episode was with my friend Ernesto. And he, Ernesto is a private practice owner. He's a former professor of psychology and counseling, and he's an entrepreneur. He does videography. He travels the world. He does conferences, and he's a lot of fun. And been connected with him for several years, but this was our first conversation. And a lot of this podcast this past year was talking to people that have been connected with on social media. And Ernesto was one of my favorite people, and we had a lot of fun talking. The one thing I really appreciate about that episode was him just sharing his story about um, getting into college and pursuing his education and his dreams, and the stuff that he's had to overcome. And been following Ernesto for a few years, just in the last few years. His business, his private practice groups have been really growing, and it's fun to see the evolution of Ernesto, even since this episode came out. So if you're an entrepreneur or a therapist or coach, definitely encourage you to check that episode out. Carrie Farrell was the next guest on the episode or on the podcast, and she is a counselor to student athletes. She works with teens and college age students, not just athletes, but a lot of experience as working with athletes as a former college softball coach herself. And so we talk about anxiety, and we talk about supporting students during pandemic, and we also talk about chronic pain and pain. Uh, I really like that interview with Carrie. She's really high energy, and you could tell, like, if you're getting coached by her, you're probably gonna like be really fired up. She's such a high energy person. Episode after Carrie was with Cindy Doyle, and we talk about her book Hold the Line, and her website Code for Couples. And Cindy is a therapist who is also married to a police officer, and her husband just retired, I think, this last year, right around when the book came out. And I really like this book because it applies a lot of the Gottman research on marriage and couples therapy to first responders. And my son-in-law is a police officer, and so I was looking forward to getting a copy of her book, and it's very practical and very open and honest about the challenges of being a first responder couple. And so really appreciated Cindy's sharing her story and sharing the principles of the book on that podcast. Jessica Vandermeer was the next episode, and in that episode we talk about trauma therapy, and it was I really liked this episode because I haven't got much training in trauma. This was early on in the year. This past year, really have started learning more about trauma and polyvagal theory and attachment. And so this was a really good conversation to kind of learn about the basics and learn about EMDR and brain spotting. The the episode after that was on the loneliness of change and growth. And this was a solo episode based on a blog that I wrote, and it's on when your friends and family don't support the changes that you want to make in your life, and maybe intentionally or unintentionally hold you back or discourage you from growth and change, and healthy boundaries. And that it also is applicable to disagreements and differences when you have to make or when you choose to make have a stance on how you manage COVID, and kind of where you're at with that. It has some practical advice on how to stick to your guns with your priorities and your decisions, but and also not take the rejection or conflict too personally. So that was a short episode. The next episode was with Dr. Corey Gilbert. He is a professor at Corbin University, and he teaches counseling and psychology, and also sex education there. And in this conversation, we talk about his book, You Can't Say That, and a book for parents, and then also a workbook for tweens and teens about sexuality. And in that episode, we talk about supporting college age students. He has some really good advice for parents, and how living in fear can affect emotional and physical health, and isolation can result from fear. So he encourages nurturing relationships and community. And he also talks about his online course for helping women heal from trauma and kind of get free from the things that hold them back from their past, and how he encourages helps folks to dream, to reconnect with their dreams and their hopes. So that was a really encouraging, wide-ranging interview with Dr. Corey Gilbert. The episode after that was with one of my favorite authors, one of my heroes, really, John Lynch, and he is the author of On Your Worst Day. And this episode coincided with the re-release or relaunch of an expanded issue of that book. And True Faced and The Cure are two books that have really made a big difference in my life, and in our family's life. And I often recommend that book to clients for homework. And so this was like a dream come true to be able to interview John. And sometimes you or there was a recent Hawkeye episode where you don't want to meet your heroes because they might disappoint you, or you might be discouraged. But for me, getting to talk with John and meet him, not disappointment at all. It was a real blessing to be able to have that conversation with him. The next episode was with Jason Wilkinson, and it was fun to talk with Jason because his story has a lot in common with mine and my wife Julie's story going through seminary. It kind of reminded me of when we got married, 27 years ago. So that was fun. But what was different with Jason is he was a youth minister for like 20 plus years or almost 20 years before he made the decision to switch over to counseling training. So that was really neat, and just appreciate his heart, and how he cares about people, like, really comes through in that interview. Julia Garrison, my friend from a New Day Counseling Center, she came on to talk about ministering in an age of trauma, a conference, and Julia is just getting started with putting conferences and trainings and workshops together, and she talked about the different workshops that were going to happen, and yeah, it's super practical for ministry leaders. But even if you're not a ministry leader, I as a counselor, I thought it was really helpful, and as a parent, I thought it was really helpful. Again, this year has been me being a rookie or a newbie with trauma, and so that was a fun conversation to learn from Julia. My guest after Julia was Tristan Collins, and she is a counselor and a coach, and she wrote the book Why Emotions Matter with her husband, John. And that is also a book that I recommend to clients. And that book is one of my favorite parts about that book is the vignettes that they share about different conversations or conflicts, and how their personality differences play out in their marriage, because it's very similar to what many of my couples go through. And so if you want to learn more about why emotions matter, and how to pay attention to them, and to use them in a useful, helpful, healing way to improve your relationships, that's a great book. And that's a really helpful book if you are like emotionally expressive and very emotional, and very in tune with your emotions, but maybe your emotions get the better of you. But it's also helpful for if you are disconnected from your emotions or not very emotionally expressive, or get the feedback from your partner or your friends, family, that like they have a hard time connecting with you because of that emotional disconnect. Definitely encourage you to read that book. My next guest was Sierra Pedro, and Sierra is a student at Western Seminary, and she's doing her internships and learning how to be a counselor. And so I really liked this conversation with Sierra because she talks about how she made the decision to pursue counseling as a career, and she also talks about her background as a journalism student and a photographer, and how those skills and those areas of her life interlap, overlap with her training as a counselor. And it's neat. She's kind of discovering what she's passionate about, and like the style of counseling that she wants to get training in and go deeper in and pursue, and also the types of clients and mental health issues that she wants to improve or help others with. So that was a fun conversation with Sierra. Lauren Wilson, the founder of Speak Out PDX, Speak Out Portland, shared her story uh, on living with bipolar disorder and being treated and healed from that. So we also talk about the integration of psychology and mental health with spirituality and faith and Christianity. And Lauren's nonprofit, Speak Out Portland, Speak Out PDX. She's got a great Instagram channel and a website, and she's also raising awareness and doing mental health workshops, and I think they're building like a coaching or trainings in the area of mental health. So check out that episode. The next episode after Lauren was my longest episode of the year, and it was 27 tips to improve your marriage or relationship. That was a solo episode, and I did that to commemorate my wife and I's 27th anniversary. And so I just share 27 tips that I've learned over the years for us as a couple, but then also just working with couples the last 17 years. And that's a long one. You have to break it up to listen to that one. But have gotten some feedback from couples and clients that I work with that that episode has been helpful. And it's kind of supplements the things that I share in couples counseling. The episode after that, it looks like I did 2 solo episodes in a row. The next episode after that was about sleep and sleep apnea and the different types of insomnia. I think that might have been during Sleep Awareness Week, National Sleep Awareness Week. And let's see, I've been talking with folks about sleep and insomnia and sleep disorders for 25 years. And it's still a conversation I have most days of the week as a health coach. And so definitely one thing I'd say is sleep is getting worse and worse over the last 25 years. I think 25 years ago, I don't think we had Monster energy drinks or Red Bull yet. But in the past 25 years, it's like a multi-billion-dollar industry and energy drinks. And so as a society and working with individuals that struggle with depression and anxiety, sleep is so important. So if you have trouble sleeping, check out that episode. The episode after that was with Rhonda Marie Staub, and she is an author and licensed marriage and family therapist back east. And I've connected with Rhonda the past couple of years and online. And this episode, she talks about her own story of getting free from an abusive marriage. And yeah, it's just such a brave story. And so she not only escaped from that to protect her children and herself, but then now she helps others as a counselor, individuals and couples. So I just love talking to Rhonda about how she did that, and definitely epitomizes courage in her story. My guests after Rhonda were Jeff and Veronica Ortiz, and Jeff is another counseling friend online, and we talk a little bit about coaching and counseling, but this episode we talk about marriage and blended family, and their story, um, and then also uh, Veronica's diagnosis and treatment for cancer, and how uh, going through that affected their marriage, and lessons that they learned going through that as a couple and as a family. And so that was a really encouraging episode. It was really neat to see their love and care for each other. My father, when I was younger, when I was 12 years old, 12, 13, he had colon cancer. And so talking with them, it reminded me of when our family went through that too. My next guest was Michael Pancha, and she is Michael was a counselor at a New Day Counseling Center, or the center that I work at. She's off on her own, still here in Portland, and we talk about trauma and EMDR and brain spotting in this episode, and we also talk a little bit about motherhood and uh, being a mom and a therapist, and the yeah, uh, it it's amazing how much uh, trauma uh, is affecting uh, people, and uh, and so that episode was really helpful for kind of uh, understanding that. Um, my guest after Michael was Nick Stumbo, and we talked about healing from pornography and teaching your children healthy sexuality. And Nick is the director of the Pure Desire Ministry, and that is an organization and ministry that helps men and women and couples uh, with the damage that pornography has had in their lives. And uh, Nick shares about uh, shares his story about recovery and being free from pornography in his life and in his marriage. Um, and yeah, really practical and encouraging episode. I haven't had many episodes about that on the podcast this year, but definitely will in the future. Um, that issue, that area of life, of addiction, and is something that I work with couples, individuals and couples, regularly. Still, even though it's not my specialty, it was my specialty probably for the first 10 years uh, of being a counselor, and so it's still something that always comes up when I work with individuals and couples, and yeah, so that episode was really helpful for that. My guest after Nick was Kimberly Dudley, and I met Kimberly at Western Seminary. She's a therapist up in Vancouver, and she was also involved with the Young Life Ministry, still is a little bit, and uh, we talk about her work as a therapist and the folks that she helps, and we also talk about her story, or her own story of healing and recovery. And what I love about that episode was um, the the people in her life that uh, helped her, but also pointed her towards being a therapist. And uh, yeah, uh, she's she's pretty neat. I hope you have a chance to listen to that episode. and kind of hear something that she taught me. I won't spoil it, but that's been really helpful. That conversation kind of helped shape my understanding about trauma and folks that go through trauma. Cheryl Baker is the director of Refuge Ministry at Imago Dei Community, Central and East Side. And my family and we started attending Imago Dei East Side Church and met Cheryl this year. And this episode was really neat. She talks about growing up, and she talks about her marriage with her husband Kevin, and the medical crisis that they experienced, and just the challenges that they both face, and she talks about the Refuge ministry, and Refuge, along with Celebrate Recovery and 423 Communities and Pure Desire, are some of the ministries that I recommend to clients who are looking to heal and recover from what they've been through in the past. And so we have a conversation about safety and healing in church community, and specifically in the Refuge ministry. After Cheryl, I had a chance to talk with Lori Nazenko, and her work as a counselor and coach, and being resilient in work and life and in relationships. And Lori was an entrepreneur, and she went back to school to be a counselor, and she does workshops and retreats for folks recovering from divorce. And so that's one of her specialties, working with folks after divorce. And I think one thing that I liked about that conversation with Lori is there's so many, there's different ways to apply what you learn as a counselor. There's different ways to express or to be there in the world. There's different ways to use your creativity and your passions and your and even what you've been through in a redemptive way, in a healing way. And so I that conversation had me thinking about doing things differently. And yeah, I think that's one thing that I want to share with younger therapists. Sometimes I have a chance to meet with them, work with them in training, help out teaching at the grad school, is discovering your own voice, and finding a way of working with people and helping people that aligns with your personality is really helpful. And Lori's doing that. So I loved talking to her about her work. My friends Risa Hobson and Summer Krause, they were my guests for, and Risa logged on to the Zoom interview from Portugal. And I went to school with Summer and Risa, and was in the office next door to Risa for years at the counseling center. And so it was fun to talk with them again after not seeing them for years. And they taught me about seeking safety. It's a program that is helpful for folks recovering from and healing from PTSD and trauma. And they have written a faith-based expression or like module and book to go along with the Seeking Safety training. And so in that episode, learn more about that. And it's and learn about working with trauma and helping people recover from trauma. And the Adam Wade Garrett was my next guest, and in that episode we talked about geek therapy or nerd counseling, and that episode was a lot of fun, a little different than most of the other episodes of the podcast this year, but it's actually one that I've listened to a couple times because it's just entertaining. We talk about Pokemon and anime, and we also talk about Dungeons and Dragons and ADHD. And I hope to have Adam back on to do a full episode to talk about ADHD. And so if you have any kids or friends or family that are into nerdy things and counseling, then that might be an episode to share with them. After Adam, I had Stephanie Alley on, and Stephanie is also someone I went to school with years ago, and we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and transitions in life. And this episode I really liked because it was not very long, but it also just kind of touched on like how life can be a journey, and how life can not play out how you were expecting. But Stephanie show her story it was just encouraging to me, how you can get through hard things and make the most of life and find reconnect and with yourself and with your passion and your purpose. And so Stephanie stopped doing counseling for a few years, but she's back and she's doing it again. And so that was really neat to see. It was if you've gotten off track in life or been derailed from your dreams, definitely encourage you to listen to that episode. After Stephanie, I had a chance to talk with Sarah Sanderson. Sarah is an author, and just a month or two ago, she got a publishing contract for her second book. And so this interview was before that. And so we talk about writing, and we talk about postpartum mental illness, and Sarah, you'll hear in this episode how we're connected, and that was a lot of fun. But if you are an author or thinking about writing a book, this is the episode to listen to. If you've struggled with postpartum depression, this is also a good episode to listen to. The next two episodes after Sarah, I had a chance to talk with Kristen Hallinan, and the first half of the interview, we talk about her article on breaking a bad family cycle, and how she did that. And in the second part of the interview, we talk about parenting and motherhood and encouraging a child, your child with special needs, and the importance of community. and the importance of people who really love and support you. And so you'll notice on a lot of these episodes with guests the importance of community, the importance of not being isolated with the challenges of life. And I really liked talking with Kristen about breaking free from patterns in family, and but also still staying connected too, and honoring family. So having healthy boundaries can be really tough, and so I really liked hearing how Kristen has navigated that. After the interview with Kristen, I sat down with my friend Ethan Morrow. I've known Ethan for years. Ethan was a friend of my kids growing up. They were all in youth theater here locally, and it's been fun to see Ethan grow up. And in this episode, he talks about career and identity, and how he realized that being a therapist was not a good fit for him, and it was extremely stressful to get to that point. And so he shares how he got through that, and it's neat. At the time of this interview, it wasn't like he was looking back and sharing something that he had gotten through. When we were talking, he was still kind of in the middle, and just recently discovering and making that decision that he didn't want to do therapy. And Ethan, he still what in this episode, he does talk about the work he does with parents and families, and it sounds like he's still probably going to do that in the future. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out and what it looks like, and maybe we'll have him back on to say more about but yeah, as a follow-up, kind of where he's at 6 months later. My guest, Angela Mize, she is also someone I went to school with to learn learn how to be a counselor. But Angela has transitioned to being a life coach, and we talk about kind of the differences, the distinctions between counseling and coaching, and that's I really liked that that interview, because it also is about courage and overcoming, and and things not going smoothly. And so Angela's journey is really encouraging and inspiring to hear. My guest after Angela was Ryan O'Hara, and Ryan is a friend that I met online, and our conversation was about foster care and adoption, and being the parent, and being trauma informed as a parent, and the it's been rocky and difficult for his family, but you can hear Ryan's like hope and faith in his family, and in his kind of calling to be a parent. And Ryan inspires me, and it was fun to get to know him even more, through this interview. Episode after that was a short episode on getting to know me a little bit better. I'd interviewed a lot of people, and so episode 38 was just kind of an update and a little bit about like what we're going through as a family. This year we moved. We started attending a new church. My son got engaged and married, and then we had our first grandchild. So lots of change. Our head was spinning. Still kind of is. Episode 39 was with Philip Stone, and Philip is a musician who just released his new or first album called Dark Canyons. And this episode was a lot of fun. It was a little bit, it touched on a little bit mental health, but it was more about poetry and songwriting and art and creativity. And also like being a musician and trying to launch an album and get your music out there. So that was a fun episode. Julia Garrison came back. I think this was episode 40. And she shared more about her own private practice and spiritual formation. So we talk about like integrative issues, integrating spiritual formation and counseling. And yeah, that's we talk about building private practice and expanding, and her experience of doing trainings and workshops on college campus has just prepared her and continued, and she's continuing to do that. So she really likes doing that stuff. So like I mentioned earlier, finding the way to express and how to help others and serve others that aligns with the way you think and your personality. This was an episode that really like highlighted that. So Julia was my first returning guest. Sarah Siri came on to talk about bad Christian moms. Bad Christian Moms, her website and her Facebook support group for moms. And Sarah also was trained as a counselor, and she transitioned to doing coaching online. And so she shares how she did that. And we talk about parenting on there, and supporting moms with motherhood and parenting. That was a lot of fun. After the episode with Sarah, I spoke with Jill Johnson Young on grief and death, and her book being a rebellious widow, and what she means by that. And Jill is an expert on grief, and this interview, I learned a lot. And she's written books on for children and grief and death, and so she shares how to talk with kids about loss and grief. That was kind of the main takeaway from that, and kind of the need to learn more about grief and how to talk about grief, even as counselors, but especially in society. After my next guest was Ainsley Silva, and Ainsley is the director of the Furcrest behavioral, I think, group in Vancouver. And we talk about his clinic. We talk about neurofeedback that they offer, and we also talked about therapy with angry boys, and angry men. And yeah, Ainsley is like in his sweet spot with that. And so we talk about how he developed that that specialty, and how he's growing, and as a therapist and as a business owner. And we also talk about the family therapy that he's done. So that was really helpful for parents as well. After it, this podcast has been fun. I just get to talk to my friends that I haven't seen, and learn from them. And one of my friends that I've learned a lot from is Connie Baker. And Connie wrote a book called Traumatized by Religious Abuse. And on this podcast, she talks about her story of abuse, and also recovering from it. And she shared, and so this episode, we talk about her story and her book. Her book is so helpful. Um, that that book, and then also Try Softer, uh, um, are two books that I recommend for folks that struggle with trauma. And so if you've, and the topic of deconstruction, and people leaving the church, people not returning to church, people being abused, and hurt from their church experience. This is a book that you want to get. Connie also does an online training, and so you can check that out, and listen to this interview for help in that area. After speaking with Connie, my next two episodes, did a couple more solo episodes. One was advice for newlyweds on marriage. And on the YouTube channel, it's just a video blog that I did maybe 5-6 years ago for clients, for newlywed couples. But in the podcast episode that you can listen to, I also share 18 books that I recommend to couples, couples who are dating, who are engaged, who are deciding whether or not to get married, books about communication, about attachment, books about emotionally focused therapy, and so and communication, and so yeah, bunch of book recommendations on that podcast episode. And then the next episode was on trying lessons learned from trying stand-up comedy for the first time. And that episode was applicable to trying anything new, and overcoming procrastination and fear. And so I hope you enjoy that episode. I did an open mic set here in Portland, and halfway through that episode, I include the video and the audio from trying stand-up comedy for the first time. After that episode, we get up to episode 47, and that's with Jeff Whiteman, and that was just released this week on December 27th. And in that episode, we talk about resilience and Jeff's research with resilience, his work with couples and with parents. And then that episode ends with some thoughts on pursuing peace and experiencing peace during pandemic, and experiencing peace with others. And yeah, the Jeff and I have a lot in common, our background, and we are kindred spirits in wanting to help missionaries and couples. So that was fun to talk with Jeff. So that was the podcast this year. The a few lessons learned from that, or I'm going to pull this up. Actually, I wrote how podcasting is pretty similar to therapy. There's a lot of overlap, but then there's a lot of things that are different. Like, so there's certain techniques and skills and fundamental principles that overlap between therapy and podcasting. Connecting with your guests or with your client. But there's also things that that are really different and unusual or uncomfortable as a counselor, as a therapist. For example, when I meet with someone individually for counseling, I probably speak like 20% of the time, 20-30%, maybe 30-40% with couples. But with individuals, it's more like 80-20, 90-10. So doing a podcast was a stretch for me, kind of sharing more my thoughts or perspective. And I still have to grow in that. And I'll try to do that more next year. But if you're a therapist or a coach or have thought about doing a podcast for a while, I definitely encourage you to get started this year. It's been a lot of fun. And it's definitely one of those things. It's like, oh man, I wish I had started earlier and been brave enough to do it earlier. Here's a few, and I'll end this episode with a few things that are similar between therapy, counseling, and podcasting that help with both. So one, open-ended questions, asking open-ended questions, expressing empathy, having comfort with silence. And on podcasting, it has to be a little shorter because if it's too long, you're listening to it, you might think that like the episode cut out or something's broken. So you can get away with that more on YouTube, the silence, because people can see what someone's thinking. But comfort with silence. I send out questions to my guests so that they can prepare, so they can be confident and comfortable. And you can tell, like in the interviews, that there's certain things that people have like talked about many times and are really comfortable with. But I think my favorite things with podcasting and counseling are when I ask a question that makes them slow down and stop and think and access a different part of their brain, or maybe come up with something that they haven't talked about like lots of times. And so it's something maybe new that they haven't shared or thought about. And so being comfortable with silence helps with that, because sometimes you have to kind of slow down and think more deeply. So creating a safe environment to be vulnerable helps with both. And I appreciated the times that people were vulnerable and real on the podcast. Humor, sense of humor helps with both. And curiosity, being curious, and wanting to understand the meaning. So exploring meaning, identity, and story. So getting to know why people do what they do who they are and the way they see themselves, and kind of the role or the purpose and mission that they have in the journey or the story of their life. That's been a lot of fun, and definitely something that I need to improve on as an interviewer. Being willing to go be below the surface, and that, even though the episodes were like an hour long, like I wish I could do an hour and a half, 2 hour episodes, or like Joe Rogan, like 3 hour episodes, but nobody would listen to that. But more time to go below the surface, and that's a luxury I have as like a therapist working with people for months. But one shot with a podcast interview can be challenging. So hopefully we'll have some guests back on. A few more. Being open and flexible to where the conversation ends up going, not having too much of an agenda. I mean, the agenda is to like get to know you and hear about your story, but also, getting to know people and not knowing things about them, learning new things about them, or letting them kind of take the conversation where they want to take it. That's fun, and that's related to creating a safe environment. Related to being open and flexible is not asking too many leading questions, or closed questions. And when I'm helping teach counseling students, if there's something that you want to share, or something that you're curious about, instead of asking a leading question, just be open and just make a statement of like what you'd like to learn, or your opinion, or ask your client if it's okay for you to make a recommendation instead of framing it as or give advice instead of framing it as a leading question. Letting so sorry, that was a little messy. Letting the client or guest be the expert and tapping into their wisdom instead of focusing on yourself or your perspective. So I really tried to do that, and that's part of being curious. And I think that's one thing. I've had a few authors on. One thing I'd like to do more in the future is have more experts, counselors, and authors on, and learn more about their books, and kind of let them share their research and their writing and their hard work. Last one, being willing to disagree, and disagree non-defensively. I'm not very confrontational. There were a few instances of like differing perspectives, but I tend to highlight the things that I agree with and things that I have in common, and so that didn't flare up or come up too much, but that might be something to stretch and grow and challenge myself in, is to interview folks that maybe really disagree with. So we'll see. Thank you for listening this year. I hope the year ends well for you. I hope you get off to a good start to this next year. I've mentioned this in the last couple podcasts, but I did an ebook, a short workbook on bridging the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And you can get that ebook. It's like I formatted it as like a workbook that you can write in. You can get that PDF from subscribing to my website, savonpen.com. And I'm going to do an episode in January on going through that workbook. And I might do a long episode going through the whole thing, and then break down like the different sections. And so encourage you to check out that PDF, and to subscribe to the website. I need 9 more folks to subscribe to the YouTube channel to get to 100. So that'd be a fun goal, a milestone to get to. And definitely encourage you to subscribe for future episodes on whatever podcast you're using. And then one more announcement. I haven't plugged this very much. On Facebook, we have the Courage Coaching and Counseling Podcast Facebook page. And I think we need less than 50 folks to get to the 500 milestone. So definitely would love your support if you could boost that number up, and that way you can get announcements of future episodes. And besides future episodes on that Facebook page, I'll start sharing a little bit more about like books and other podcasts that are helpful, and also things that help with mental health and relationships, whether it's parenting or marriage, or dating. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, guys. And thanks for being along on the start of this journey, the first year of the Courage Coaching and Counseling Podcast.